My own children brought me a cup of tea with sleeping pills, smiled at me and said, "Mom, you're going to live downstairs now. It's better for everyone. First, let me thank you for watching Letters to Helen. Please subscribe and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. My name is Margaret, and I'm 68 years old. For 43 years, I raised 4 children as a single mother after my husband died in a construction accident when I was 25. I worked 3 jobs to keep us afloat. Cleaning offices at night from 11 p.m. until 6 a.m., serving lunch at Jefferson Elementary School from 10:30 a.m. until 2:30 p.m., and doing bookkeeping for 3 small businesses on weekends. Every Friday evening, I'd sit at our old kitchen table with stacks of receipts and ledgers, working until midnight to earn an extra $150 a week. I never remarried because every moment, every dollar, every ounce of energy went to my children, David, Lisa, Michael, and Jennifer. When David needed braces at 13, I sold my wedding ring to pay the orthodontist. When Lisa wanted to join the debate team, I took on extra cleaning contracts to afford her travel expenses. When Michael broke his arm playing football, I worked double shifts for 2 months to cover the medical bills our insurance wouldn't pay. When Jennifer dreamed of going to art camp, I ate peanut butter sandwiches for lunch for 6 months to save the $500 for tuition. I remember Christmas mornings when they were young, watching their faces light up as they opened presents I'd bought, with money I'd hidden in a coffee can under my mattress. I'd save $5 or $10 from every paycheck, sometimes going without lunch or walking to work to save bus fare. David got his bicycle when he was 9, a red Schwinn he'd admired in the shop window for months. Lisa got her easel and paint set when she was 11, complete with professional-grade watercolors. Michael received his first guitar when he was 12, a beautiful acoustic instrument I'd found at a pawn shop and had restored. Jennifer got her camera when she was 14, a real film camera that made her feel like a professional photographer. Those were the happiest years of my life, despite the exhaustion, despite the constant worry about money, despite the loneliness of raising 4 children without a partner. Every sacrifice felt worth it when I saw them succeed. David became valedictorian of his high school class. Lisa earned a scholarship to study nursing. Michael started his own small construction business at 22. Jennifer got her degree in graphic design and married a kind man who treated her well. When they grew up and started their own families, I thought I'd finally earned some rest, some peace, maybe even some recognition for the decades of sacrifice I'd made for their futures. I sold our old family house, the same house where I'd raised them, where I'd measured their heights on the kitchen door frame, where I'd helped them with homework at the dining room table my husband had built with his own hands. The sale gave me enough money to live comfortably, or so I thought. David suggested I move into his basement apartment temporarily, just until I found my own place. He lived in a beautiful 4-bedroom house in a quiet suburban neighborhood, with his wife Karen and their 2 young sons, Tyler and Brandon. The basement had been converted into what David called a cozy apartment. Really just a large room with a tiny bathroom, a mini fridge, and a hot plate. There was one small window near the ceiling that let in a little natural light during the day, but mostly the space felt dim and cramped. "It's perfect for you, Mom," David had said enthusiastically. "You'll have your privacy, but we'll be right upstairs if you need anything. And Tyler and Brandon will love having Grandma so close." That was 3 years ago. 3 long years of living in that basement, paying David $800 every month for rent, money I now know was being stolen from my own trust fund, though I wouldn't discover that devastating truth until much later. The arrangement started innocently enough, but quickly evolved into something that made me feel less like a cherished mother and more like hired help who paid for the privilege of working. Every morning at 6 a.m., I'd climb the narrow wooden stairs to the main house and start my daily routine. I'd prepare breakfast for the entire family, scrambled eggs with cheese for Karen, who was always trying some new diet, oatmeal with fresh fruit for the boys, and coffee strong enough to wake the dead for David, who worked construction and left the house by 7 a.m. After David left for work and Karen drove the boys to school, I'd begin my real job, maintaining their household. I'd load and run the dishwasher, wipe down all the kitchen counters, sweep and mop the floors, and tidy up the living room where the boys had left their toys scattered everywhere the night before. Then I'd start the laundry, sorting, washing, drying, folding, and putting away clothes for 4 people. Karen had expensive taste in clothing, and everything required special care. Her silk blouses needed hand washing, her cashmere sweaters had to be laid flat to dry, and her designer jeans couldn't go in the regular dryer cycle. Tuesdays and Thursdays, Lisa would arrive with 2 enormous bags of laundry from her own household. She worked as a medical receptionist at a busy clinic and had 3 children. Emma, age 7, Lucas, age 5, and baby Sophie, who was only 18 months old. Lisa would dump the laundry bags in my basement and say, "Thanks, Mom. You're a lifesaver. I'll pick these up on Sunday." She never offered to pay me for the detergent, the fabric softener, or the hours of work involved in washing, drying, and folding clothes for a family of 5. Michael would stop by every other week, usually on Friday afternoons when he knew I'd be alone. He'd come downstairs to my basement with that charming smile he'd perfected as a teenager, the same smile that had gotten him out of trouble countless times during his youth. "Hey, Mom, how's my favorite lady doing?" he'd say, giving me a hug that felt genuine, until he started talking about his latest financial emergency. There was always some crisis that required immediate cash. His truck needed new tires, $400. His business partner had bailed on a job, leaving Michael responsible for materials he couldn't return, $600. His girlfriend Amanda needed help with her rent because she'd been laid off from her job at the department store, $300. The stories changed, but the requests never stopped. In 3 years, I'd given Michael over $4,000, always with his promise to pay me back as soon as this job pays out, or when Amanda gets her unemployment check, or next month for sure. Mom? Jennifer's demands were different, but equally exhausting. She'd call me at the last minute with requests that sounded more like orders. "Mom, I need you to watch Emma tonight. Brad and I have dinner plans." Sometimes she'd drop off her daughter Emma, David's stepdaughter from her previous marriage, for entire weekends without much explanation. Emma was a sweet child, but she required constant attention. She had food allergies that meant I couldn't feed her anything without carefully reading every ingredient label. She was afraid of the dark, so she needed a nightlight, and often woke up crying for her mother. She missed her biological father, who lived across the country and would sometimes spend hours asking me questions I couldn't answer about why her parents got divorced. The most exhausting part wasn't the physical work or even the financial drain. It was the way they spoke to me, as if I were somehow failing to meet their expectations, despite doing everything they asked. Karen would make comments about how I never seemed to get the laundry quite right, because I'd folded her husband's t-shirts differently than she preferred. Lisa would criticize my childcare methods, saying I was too old-fashioned when I wouldn't let her children watch violent movies or play video games for hours. Michael would act annoyed when I reminded him about money he owed me, as if I were being unreasonably demanding by expecting repayment. The humiliation started small, with comments that could almost be dismissed as thoughtlessness rather than cruelty. Karen would make remarks about the basement having an old person smell when her book club friends came over for their monthly meetings. She'd spray air freshener around the stairway leading to my area and apologize to her guests for the musty odor from downstairs. When they had dinner parties, which happened every few weeks because Karen loved entertaining, she'd ask me to stay in my basement room for the evening so their guests wouldn't feel awkward about my presence. "It's nothing personal, Margaret," she'd explain in that condescending tone she'd perfected. "It's just that when people come over for adult conversation, having a parent around makes everyone feel like they have to watch their language and be on their best behavior. You understand?" I didn't understand, but I stayed downstairs anyway, listening to the laughter and conversation filtering through the ceiling, feeling like a shameful secret that had to be hidden away when company arrived. Lisa's cruelty was more direct and somehow more painful because it came from my own daughter. When I'd offer opinions about anything, politics, current events, parenting strategies, even simple things like recipes or home organization, she'd roll her eyes dramatically and say, "Mom, times have changed. You wouldn't understand how things work now." She'd say this in front of her children, teaching them by example that their grandmother's thoughts and experiences had no value. Once, when I suggested that her youngest child might benefit from a more consistent bedtime routine, Lisa snapped at me in front of the entire family during Sunday dinner. "Mom, I'm the parent here. I don't need advice from someone who raised kids 30 years ago with completely different methods. Sophie is fine, and I'll handle her schedule my way." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the children stopped eating and looked uncomfortable, but no one, not David, not Karen, not Michael, not Jennifer, said anything to defend me or suggest that Lisa had been unnecessarily harsh. Michael's humiliation was perhaps the cruelest because it was disguised as humor. He'd bring his friends over occasionally, usually when they were working on some project in David's garage. They'd come downstairs to use the bathroom or get something from storage, and Michael would introduce me as my crazy old mother who lives in the basement like a troll. His friends would laugh, and Michael would continue the joke. "She's been down there so long, I think she's forgotten what sunlight looks like. We feed her scraps and she does our laundry in exchange." Everyone would laugh while I stood there, trying to smile as if I found it amusing too, as if my own son comparing me to a mythical creature who lived under bridges wasn't deeply hurtful and humiliating. Jennifer's approach was to treat me like hired help rather than her mother. She'd arrive at David's house and immediately start giving me instructions without even saying hello. "Emma needs her lunch cut into small pieces because she's in a picky phase. Make sure she doesn't watch any TV because it overstimulates her before nap time. Her clothes are in the bag, but only the pink pajamas. She won't wear anything else right now. I'll be back around midnight." Then she'd leave for hours without telling me where she was going or how to reach her if there was an emergency. I'd spend the day caring for her child while she went shopping, got her hair done, met friends for lunch, or did whatever she pleased with her free time. When she'd finally return, usually later than promised, she'd scoop up Emma and leave with a casual, "Thanks, Mom," tossed over her shoulder like I was a babysitter being dismissed after completing a job. The worst part was that I accepted all of this treatment because I convinced myself it was temporary, that things would improve, that my children were just going through stressful periods in their lives, and didn't realize how their words and actions affected me. I told myself that being helpful was what good mothers do, that sacrifice was natural, that my discomfort was less important than their needs. Everything changed on a cold Sunday evening in late October. The autumn leaves were falling outside the small basement window, and I'd spent the day preparing a large family dinner upstairs. Pot roast with vegetables, homemade rolls, apple pie made from scratch with apples. I'd picked myself at a local orchard. All 4 of my children were present with their families, something that happened rarely enough that I'd hoped it might be a pleasant family gathering. After dinner, while I was cleaning dishes in the kitchen, I heard David call my name from the living room. "Mom, can you come in here for a minute? We need to talk to you about something." I dried my hands on the kitchen towel and walked into the living room, where all 4 of my children were seated with serious expressions. Karen had taken the boys upstairs for baths, and Jennifer's daughter Emma was playing quietly with toys in the corner. Something about the formal arrangement, they were all sitting while I stood, made my stomach tighten with anxiety. David cleared his throat and assumed the role of family spokesperson, something he'd done since childhood, whenever the siblings needed to present a united front about something. "Mom, we've been talking, and we think it's time to make some changes to your living situation." My heart began pounding. "What kind of changes?" "We think it would be better for everyone if you moved to Sunset Manor," Lisa said, her voice taking on that artificially gentle tone people use when they're delivering bad news they think is good for you. Sunset Manor was the assisted living facility I'd driven past countless times on my way to the grocery store. It was a large institutional brick building surrounded by a chain-link fence with small windows and a parking lot that always seemed half empty. I'd always felt sorry for the residents I'd occasionally seen sitting outside in wheelchairs or walking slowly around the tiny courtyard with their metal walkers. "I don't need assisted living," I said, my voice coming out smaller than I'd intended. "I take care of myself perfectly well. I take care of all of you." Michael leaned forward with that patronizing smile I'd grown to hate. "Mom, let's be realistic here. You're almost 70 years old. Living in a basement isn't appropriate for someone your age. What if you fall down those stairs? What if you have a medical emergency and no one knows about it for hours? I'm 68, not 90, I protested. I've never fallen down those stairs. I've never had a medical emergency. I take my blood pressure medication. I eat healthy meals. I exercise by walking around the neighborhood every morning." Jennifer, who had been scrolling through her phone during most of this conversation, looked up long enough to add, "It's not just about your physical health, Mom. It's about social interaction. At Sunset Manor, you'll be around people your own age. You can participate in activities, make friends, have a social life instead of just staying cooped up in that basement all the time." "I don't stay cooped up," I said, my voice rising slightly. "I cook for this family, clean this house, watch your children, do your laundry. I'm plenty busy, and I'm contributing something meaningful." The silence that followed felt heavy and uncomfortable. Finally, Karen appeared in the doorway, having finished getting the boys ready for bed. Her presence seemed to embolden David to continue. "The thing is, Mom," David said, looking everywhere except directly at me, "Karen and I have been talking, and we'd like to have our space back. We want to convert the basement into a home office and maybe a playroom for the boys. And honestly, having you living here has been, well, it's been stressful for everyone." Lisa nodded in agreement. "Mom, you have to understand that times have changed. We all have our own families now, our own responsibilities. We can't be expected to take care of you forever." "Take care of me?" I repeated, incredulous. "I pay you $800 a month in rent. I cook, clean, babysit, and do laundry for free. How exactly are you taking care of me?" Michael actually laughed. "Come on, Mom. $800 doesn't even cover utilities down there, let alone the food you eat or the wear and tear on the house." That night, I lay in my narrow basement bed staring at the ceiling and listening to the familiar sounds of my son's family settling in for the evening above me. David's heavy footsteps moving from the kitchen to the living room, Karen running water in the master bathroom, the boys' muffled voices, and occasional bursts of laughter as they got ready for bed. These sounds had become the soundtrack to my evenings for 3 years, but tonight they felt different, distant and cold, like I was already a stranger in this house. I couldn't stop replaying the conversation in my mind, the way they'd ambushed me, presenting a united front without giving me any warning or opportunity to defend myself. The casual cruelty of Michael's laughter when I'd pointed out that I paid rent and contributed labor to the household. The dismissive way Jennifer had suggested I needed to make friends, as if my relationship with my own family wasn't sufficient social interaction for any reasonable person. But what hurt most was the realization that they'd been planning this behind my back for weeks, maybe months. They'd discussed my future, my living situation, my supposed needs without ever asking what I actually wanted or needed. They'd made decisions about my life as if I were a problem, to be solved rather than their mother, who had sacrificed everything for their futures. The next morning, after David left for work and Karen drove the boys to school, I found myself looking around the basement with different eyes. I'd accepted this space as temporary for 3 years, never really examining it closely or thinking about David's claim that $800 barely covered my expenses. The mini refrigerator was ancient and barely kept food cold. The hot plate I used for cooking had only 2 burners, making it impossible to prepare complex meals. The bathroom had no ventilation fan, so steam from showers made the whole space feel damp and musty. The single window was small and positioned so high that I couldn't see outside without standing on a chair. For $800 a month, I could rent a decent 1-bedroom apartment in town with full kitchen facilities. proper heating and air conditioning, multiple windows with natural light, and neighbors who were actual neighbors rather than family members who treated me like an inconvenience. But something else was bothering me about David's financial claims. If my rent barely covered utilities and food, how was his family managing to live so comfortably? David worked in construction, which could be lucrative but was also seasonal and unpredictable. Karen worked part-time as a nurse, maybe 20 hours a week, yet they lived in a beautiful 4-bedroom house, drove 2 relatively new cars, took family vacations every summer, and Karen always seemed to have money for new clothes, spa treatments, and dinners out with friends. I decided to start paying closer attention to the financial details of the life happening above my head. David had always been somewhat careless about paperwork, leaving important documents scattered around the house instead of filing them properly. As I continued my daily routine of cleaning and organizing their home, I began noticing things I'd previously ignored. Bank statements left on the kitchen counter, credit card bills stuck to the refrigerator with magnets, tax documents piled on David's desk in the corner of the living room. I didn't set out to snoop deliberately, but when I was dusting David's desk and organizing his scattered papers, I couldn't help but notice some interesting numbers. His monthly bank statement showed regular deposits that seemed much larger than what I would have expected from a construction worker, even a skilled one with his own small business. The more I noticed, the more curious I became. If David was doing so well financially, why was he constantly borrowing money from me for emergencies? Why did he and Karen always claim to be struggling with the mortgage payments? Why did they need my $800 in rent so desperately? I started making mental notes about the inconsistencies I was observing, but I wasn't ready to actively investigate. Not yet. I told myself I was just being naturally observant, not deliberately prying into their private business. 3 days after the family meeting that had turned my world upside down, I decided I needed to understand the full scope of my financial situation. If I was going to be forced out of David's house and into some assisted living facility, I needed to know exactly what resources I had available. I'd been trusting my children to handle various aspects of my finances for years, but now I realized that trust might have been misplaced. I started in the basement storage area, where David kept boxes of old documents and papers. I'd helped him organize some of these files over the years, so I had a general idea of what was stored where. There were boxes labeled taxes, insurance, legal documents, and family papers. I decided to start with the legal documents, since that's where I would expect to find information about the trust fund my husband had established for me before his death. The first box I opened contained David's personal financial records going back several years. I wasn't intending to pry, but some of the numbers I saw were shocking. Monthly bank statements showed deposits of $3,500 from his construction business, plus another $1,500 from Karen's part-time nursing position. That was $5,000 in monthly income, yet they constantly claimed to be financially stressed and unable to afford basic expenses without my help. Their mortgage payment, according to the documents I found, was only $1,800 per month, even accounting for utilities, food, car payments, and other basic expenses. They should have had plenty of money left over each month. So, where was it all going? I kept digging through the financial records, and gradually a picture began to emerge that made me feel sick to my stomach. Credit card statements showed monthly payments to something called Golden Horizons Investment Group. $1,200 every single month for the past 2 years. There were also regular payments to Prestige Auto Finance for what appeared to be a luxury car loan, and charges at expensive restaurants, high-end clothing stores, and resort hotels that suggested a lifestyle far more extravagant than anything I'd observed. They weren't struggling financially at all. They were living well beyond what their legitimate income should have supported, and they were hiding their spending from me, while simultaneously claiming they needed my financial help to survive. But the most devastating discovery came when I found a folder tucked behind some old tax returns, labeled simply MT, my initials. Inside that folder were documents related to the trust fund my husband had established for me, funded by his life insurance policy, and the settlement from the construction company responsible for his workplace accident. According to the original trust documents, the fund had been designed to provide me with financial security for the rest of my life. The principal amount was $147,000, invested conservatively to generate monthly distributions of $800 that were supposed to be deposited directly into my personal checking account, starting when I turned 65. But I had never received those monthly payments, not once. Instead, I found documents showing that David had somehow gotten himself listed as my financial power of attorney and had been redirecting those monthly trust distributions to his own bank account for the past 3 years. The signature on the power of attorney document looked vaguely like mine, but I knew with absolute certainty that I had never signed such a paper. My own son had forged my signature to steal my money. The folder contained more devastating revelations. Lisa was listed as a secondary beneficiary on the trust account, which meant she knew about the arrangement and had access to the funds. Michael had apparently borrowed against the trust twice in the past year, using forged documents to withdraw lump sums of $3,000 and $2,500. Jennifer had made 4 separate withdrawals from the trust account, ranging from $800 to $1,500 each time. All 4 of my children had been stealing from me, while convincing me that I was a financial burden who barely contributed enough to cover my own expenses. The $800 I'd been paying David for rent each month was literally my own money, taken from my trust fund and then charged back to me, as if I owed it to him for the privilege of living in his basement. I sat on the concrete floor of that basement, surrounded by evidence of my children's betrayal, and felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Pure righteous anger. Not the sad resignation I'd felt when they humiliated me. Not the quiet disappointment I'd experienced when they treated me like hired help. But genuine fury at being robbed and manipulated by the people I'd sacrificed everything to raise and support. For 3 days, I prepared my case like a lawyer getting ready for trial. I made photocopies of every relevant document, organized them chronologically, and created a detailed timeline of their theft. I calculated exactly how much money they'd stolen from me. David had taken $28,800 in redirected trust payments over 3 years. Michael had borrowed $7,500 against the trust. Jennifer had withdrawn $4,200. Lisa, as secondary beneficiary, had received monthly payments of $200 for 2 years, totaling $4,800. In total, my 4 children had stolen more than $47,000 from me, while convincing me that I was financially dependent on their charity. I also purchased a small digital recording device and spent those 3 days documenting their continued lies and manipulation. I recorded Lisa complaining to Karen about how expensive it was to have me around, not knowing I was within earshot. I captured Michael joking with his friends about borrowing from Mom's secret stash whenever he needed quick cash. I got Jennifer on tape telling a friend how easy it was to get free babysitting from me because I had nothing else to do with my time. By Friday morning, the day I was supposed to move into Sunset Manor, I was ready. David came downstairs around 7 a.m. to remind me that the assisted living facility was expecting me that afternoon, and that he'd arranged for a moving company to collect my belongings. He seemed nervous, probably because he knew what he'd been doing was wrong, but I don't think he expected me to have discovered the full scope of their deception. "David," I said calmly, "I need to show you something before I go anywhere." I handed him a folder containing copies of all the trust documents, bank statements, and withdrawal records I'd discovered. I found out about Dad's trust fund. All of it. I watched the color drain from his face as he realized what he was looking at. His hands were shaking as he flipped through the pages, seeing his own financial records, his own forged signatures, his own theft documented in black and white. "Mom, I can explain this," he started, but I held up my hand to stop him. "No, you're going to listen to me now, and you're going to do exactly what I tell you to do. First, You're going to call Sunset Manor and cancel my reservation. Then you're going to call the bank and transfer complete control of the trust fund back to me. Today, you're going to calculate every penny you've stolen from me over the past 3 years, with interest, and you're going to pay it back. David tried to interrupt again, but I continued talking over him. You're also going to call your siblings and tell them to come over here this afternoon for another family meeting. And this time, you're going to explain to them that their free access to my money is over, permanently. I pulled out the digital recorder and played back a few seconds of Michael's voice joking about Mom's secret stash. David's face went white. I have hours of recordings documenting your lies, your theft, and your complete disrespect for me. If you refuse to do what I'm asking, I'm taking all of this evidence to a lawyer on Monday morning. Elder financial abuse is a serious crime, David. You could go to prison. For the first time in 3 years, my son looked at me with something approaching respect and fear. What exactly do you want? He asked quietly. I want my money, my independence, and my dignity back. I want an end to the lies and manipulation. And I want all 4 of you to understand that I am not your victim anymore. Within 2 hours, David had made the necessary phone calls. The trust fund was back under my control by the end of the week. The family meeting that afternoon was unlike anything we'd ever experienced as a family. For the first time in my adult life, I held all the power in the room. My 4 children sat in the same seats they'd occupied just days earlier, when they'd ambushed me with their assisted living ultimatum. But now the dynamics were completely reversed. I presented the evidence systematically, like a prosecutor laying out a case. I showed them the trust documents, the forged power of attorney, the bank statements proving their theft. I played selected recordings that demonstrated their lies and manipulation. I calculated the total amount they'd stolen and presented each of them with an itemized bill for their share. Lisa broke down crying, claiming she'd thought the secondary beneficiary payments were some kind of gift from the trust, not stolen money. She swore she'd never realized I wasn't receiving my own distributions. Michael tried to argue that his borrowing against the trust was legitimate, since he'd always intended to pay it back, conveniently ignoring the forged documents he'd used to access the money. Jennifer sat in sullen silence, occasionally checking her phone as if this confrontation was just another inconvenience in her busy schedule. David, to his credit, seemed genuinely ashamed when confronted with the full scope of what he had done. Mom, he said, his voice breaking slightly, I never meant for it to go this far. At first, I really was just trying to help manage your money, make sure it was safe. But then Karen and I had some financial problems, and I thought I could borrow from the trust temporarily and pay it back before you ever knew. But you didn't pay it back, I said firmly. You kept taking more, and you convinced me I was a burden while you were living off my money. I know, he whispered. I know, and I'm sorry. The apologies felt hollow after years of deception, but they were a start. Within a month, I'd found a beautiful 1-bedroom apartment in downtown, just 3 blocks from the public library, and a lovely park where I could walk every morning. The apartment had large windows that filled the space with natural light, a full kitchen where I could cook proper meals, and neighbors who treated me like a person rather than an obligation. My monthly expenses, including rent, utilities, and food, totaled less than $1,200, far less than what I'd been paying David while also providing unpaid labor. The trust fund, back under my control, provided me with financial security I hadn't experienced in years. The monthly distributions of $800, combined with my modest Social Security payments, gave me enough income to live comfortably without depending on anyone else. Lisa and I slowly began rebuilding our relationship. She started paying me $40 every time I watched her children, and she stopped making condescending comments about my opinions or methods. Michael has been making small payments toward his debt, $25 here, $50 there. Though at his current rate, he'll be repaying me for the next decade. Jennifer and I rarely speak now, which has actually been a relief. She was always the most selfish of my children, and without the leverage of free babysitting and financial manipulation. She seems to have little interest in maintaining a relationship with me. David visits me occasionally, and we're working on rebuilding trust between us. Karen treats me with cautious respect now, probably because she's realized I'm not the helpless victim she thought I was. Their boys ask when Grandma is coming back to live with them, which breaks my heart a little. But I explain that Grandma has her own home now, where they can come visit anytime. The basement feels like a different lifetime. Sometimes I drive past David's house and see that small window near the ground, and I remember the woman who lived down there, isolated, manipulated, and convinced she was unwanted. That woman found her strength in the most unexpected place, in the evidence of her children's betrayal. Sometimes the truth sets you free, even when it breaks your heart. Sometimes standing up for yourself means risking the relationships you value most. But I've learned that a relationship built on lies and exploitation isn't worth preserving. Do you think I was right to stand up for myself? Or should I have stayed silent to keep the family peace? What would you have done in my situation? Have you ever faced something like this in your own family? Please share your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to tell me what city you're watching from. Thank you so much for listening until the very end. This is Letters to Helen, and I'll see you in the next story.